willingly does that, in my opinion. Um, the IRS came out and said, there's been a lot of muddying of the waters with the gig economy. And they defined what staff augmentation was, which is essentially companies who outsourced individuals who they then hired back to do specific contract things. But the real definition around that has more to do with how much independence do you have as that consultant slash contractor. So the more independence that you have, the more likely you're going to be seen as an independent contractor versus being staff augmentation. And obviously there are tax implications to this. There's tax implications to everything tonight, sorry to say. But what was happening, as you can imagine, is companies were like, well, we'd rather put the tax burden on the individual and not have them as an in-house employee. We don't have to offer benefits, so we'll just outsource it all. And that's sort of how they went with that. And, right or wrong, I'm not here to make a judgment one way or the other, but the IRS decided that, you really do have to have employees. So let's define what it means to be an actual independent contractor or consultant. The terms are actually very much interchangeable. But the IRS also has some very specific rules around how independent that person is. So I'll give you an example. This is my favorite example, by the way. If I were to go to work for a company that said you need to show up at 8 o'clock and you're here until 5 and here's your lunchtime and here are your break times and we want you to wear this nice, lovely company shirt and we're going to tell you what to work on and you're just going to do it. That's going to put me squarely in the category of staff augmentation. But an independent consultant, yes, we do set our own hours, and yes, we typically match our hours to those of our clients. But for the most part, we have full authority and agency to make the decisions around how we do the work that we do. Obviously, there's client input. Obviously, the client signs off on it. Like, yes, we really want you to do this in Storyline because that's the software we have versus Captivate, which we don't have and don't want to buy a license for. So, there's a lot of independence to that. But with that, there are trappings that come with that. So things like you need a business name, you need to have yourself set up a certain way. You need to have, in some cases, I've been asked to provide a business card as proof that I am a bona fide individual under my own company name. So like I said, there's a lot to that. But the terms, you will hear them used interchangeably. So it comes down to the nuts and bolts, as with everything, right? The devil's in the details. So that's what staff augmentation is really all about, is determining how much are you really working for the client versus being their employee.
Hey, Jen, somebody has a question, and if anybody else in the group has a response to this, feel free to put it in the chat. Where do you see freelancer in this landscape? And that's a good question.
That's a great question. That's a fantastic question. I used to call myself a freelancer, and I don't call myself that anymore. I call myself an independent contractor because there is a perception of the first 4 letters of the word freelancer that freelancing is free. And it's okay to lowball a freelancer because, they're not really real. They're just sort of like there. And they'll be good with the lowest rate I can possibly come up with. And I've gotten that and I've heard that so many times that I said, I got to take a step back here. Clearly, this is a term I don't want to use anymore. I would rather be known as an independent consultant because you're getting the same out of me one way or the other, but I'm not working for peanuts. Carolyn put a really great comment in there is, people who work for Fiverr might be considered a freelancer. Yeah, people who are willing to take whatever work for the lowest price you can get. I mean, I don't personally associate that term with freelancer. However, I am not the only person on this planet. And as we all know, everyone's got different opinions. So yeah, contractor and vendor. Ooh, that's a good one.
Yeah, I would say everybody just kind of, I don't know that there's one specific definition, but when I think of vendor, a lot of times when we look at contracts, oh gosh, correct me if I'm wrong here, but usually me as a consultant or a contractor, when I go in, there's usually going to be the formal definitions of, client and vendor. I'm typically seen as the vendor and they're typically seen as the client in most of the contracts. But again, I think it just kind of depends on each company and every way they use that. You know, the terminology could differ. So if anybody has anything different to add, or, you know, feel free to put in the comments. Oh, gig economy. Don't want to get held up here too long, but I could talk about that forever. The gig economy, you know, like it's interesting. I mean, so many people that are interested in the session this evening, and with changes going on in the world. And, you know, I think there's just been a large conversation about how for the longest time, employees were not being seen as valued by their employers. I think employers are trying to take more of an effort now and a foot forward to value their employees more. But I think that's kind of pushed some people to go out on their own and do their own thing. And it kind of, this might be far-fetched, but it's funny, you know, how when we think of the olden days when, you know, we, you know, most of us weren't like around or anything, and there, you know, everybody was doing, you know, they were tradesmen and they had their own jobs and their own home that they specialized in, and people would come to them for work. And it's interesting how, you know, like I feel like we're slowly starting to see changes go back to that, but it's in like the information age and information technology, and, you know, not the same type of work. So anyways, that's a whole nother conversation for another day. But yes, gig economy I think is very interesting in regards to changes as to what could be coming or whatever, my own personal assumptions. So all right, moving on then, we wanted to take a look at the pros and cons. If anybody again has anything to add or change differently, please let us know. There's tons of pros, there's tons of cons here, but we thought the pros, you know, you can be your own boss. Me coming from a teaching background, I can use the bathroom when I want. I can go wherever I need at any time. I guess you can do that also as an employee. That's something I always tell former teachers, like going out from teaching into there. But I guess you can do that even as an employee. But so your work-life balance, you're in charge of that. So I think me especially, I tend to be a workaholic. So I still work a whole lot, but it's also, I'm working for me to better me and my future and my family's future. And it's not necessarily to better some large corporation in their future. But, you know, everybody has their thing, but then that comes with responsibilities. I'll save that for Jen. Digital nomadism. So a lot of times, you know, on our jobs and our industry, you can work remotely. So you can travel and work from wherever you are, which is fabulous. Something I've been doing since 2016, absolutely love. Yes, you definitely have the potential to earn more. You can test new skills. You can, yes, start slowly. You can still be employed and do this slowly on your own until you want and actually get out and, you know, become full-time or continue to do it part-time. Test out a company like that. So you can have work for multiple clients at one time. So you're constantly doing something different and not working for the same company and the same thing all the time. So, I mean, there's pros and cons to both, and people have their preferences. Some people like like it one way, and some people totally like it the opposite way. And that's what's so great about all these different options we have. So Jen, I think you're going to review some of the cons and touch on anything I missed.
Yes. So one of the sort of downsides of being your own boss, and I have used this in conversation where sometimes I have to look in the mirror and I have to give myself a stern talking to. And sometimes I actually say, man, my boss, she's mean today. Because there are times where you are your own motivator, right? And the shield that you have of working for a company is, you don't realize how much of a shield that really is until you don't have it. So from a liability perspective, if I royally screw something up, that's on me. I can't, you know, say, well, it was the coworker. You know, if I jam the printer, I got to yell at myself for jamming my own printer, right? So there's a lot of liability that's sewn up in this. And we will talk about this in other areas as well. So don't think this is the last of that. Responsibility. Step up. You know, everyone has those days where they roll over and like, oh man, I just don't want to get out of bed, but I got client work to do. So I get out of bed and I do the client work, right? Sometimes that's a little different. Finding your own work, absolutely. Suddenly, instead of the boss walking down the hall and saying, hey, we've got this great project for you, you don't have that. You have to go out and generate your own client list. You have to go out and talk to people. You have to network. In many respects, you're wearing like 18 different hats, because you are not just the instructional designer or the trainer. You're also marketing and communications and accounts payable or billing, however you choose to call that, right? You are responsible for the entire company. And while it might just be you, that's a lot of you. So what I tell people is, be prepared for your day to not just be an 8-hour day, because you have to build in time and do everything else. You do have fewer rights as an independent consultant because it's just you. You're really on the hook for a lot of this. And along with all of that comes, and I'm sure this is of no surprise, but because it is all on you, you are responsible for all of your overhead. And you don't realize how much overhead you have until you're paying the bill yourself, right? So think of all those times where you were at a company and you print off, a page or two of this or a page or two of that, of personal stuff on the company computers. Well, I never realized how much paper and ink I go through until suddenly it's like, oh man, I gotta go buy more paper. Right. Wow. Okay. So again, part of the responsibility is all on you. That also means that part of that overhead is you have to take care of yourself in terms of retirement funding. You're doing that all on your own. Your health insurance, your vision insurance, your dental insurance. The list seems to go on and on. I know I'm probably sounding very much like a downer at the moment. So let me round up the downer bullet points here. Is you're an outsider. You can be viewed as an outsider, which makes it a little more difficult sometimes to work with some of your clients, because the person that brought you in to do something isn't necessarily the only person you're working with. Like they're all gung-ho, they brought you in to do this, but now all of a sudden you're working with other people on the team that you're not a part of. You're the outsider. You're suspicious. This is weird. Why did she come to us with this? Why did they outsource this, right? So you do have some of that to deal with. So you have a lot more interpersonal relationship building that you're going to have to do than you ever had to think about before. Taxes. Everybody's favorite hot button word, taxes. So yeah, you are responsible for all of the taxes yourself. Luckily, and I do recommend this, you do have the ability to pay them quarterly, which I highly recommend. We'll talk about that. We've got a couple slides dedicated just to taxes. I promise you it's not going to be that bad, I swear. And health insurance. I mean, there are ways that you can get decent health insurance without having to mortgage your house back. So there are options that are out there. You do have to do some research. One of the biggest things, though, that I'm going to go back to, I'm going to circle this right back to Kari's list of pros, is that being your own boss can be very interesting. I discovered that I like things that I hated doing in the corporate environment because I did them absolutely every single day. I was so bored. I was so bored. I don't even know how else to express it, except I was incredibly bored. And I thought I hated doing that work. So I'm like, get me out of here. I gotta do something else, anything else. Now I've discovered, now that I've gotten some distance from having to do the same exact thing every single day, it's like, oh, you know what? I really did enjoy doing that. So now you can kind of pick and choose your assignments, and you can sort of pick and choose who you want to work for. Because it works both ways, right? So when a client comes to you and says, hey, we've got XYZ we'd like you to work on, in many respects, you're interviewing them as much as they're interviewing you. And I have walked away from clients. I'm like, you're a little too discombobulated for me to help. Maybe you need to go back to the drawing board and think about what it is you really want from this project. And then we'll discuss it when you've got that all figured out. And sometimes I hear back from them and sometimes I don't, right? But in the corporate environment, as we all know, right, you don't always have the luxury of saying, yeah, this project is like incomplete. I don't know how I'm going to build XYZ. You don't really have the luxury of saying, why don't you take this back and think about it, and then let me know when you've made a decision, right? It doesn't work in the corporate world. So there's a lot of pros and cons, and they do mesh back and forth with each other. So all kinds of fun things.
And one thing I want to throw out really quick that we were mentioning before on the con side was that, it's just you're just by yourself. And I want to ask everybody really quick, if you are interested in being a consultant, going out on your own, having your own company, or if you have before, I am curious, how interested are you in the idea of growing and like getting employees? And this is something me and Jen talked about. So I'm just curious. I'm going to briefly touch on it. So if you can, in the comments, in the chat, just put, yes, I'd like to grow and have employees, or no, not so interested. I just love to hear what people have to say about that, because I know my take on that has drastically changed, because it was just me, and it's like, oh, it's just me and my company. In the beginning, it's like, of course I want to grow and expand and I want to have all these staff. And then I remember the more I learned and the more I got and went to different conferences and listened to people who actually have their own businesses. Maybe it's easier than I think, because I haven't had my own employees, but I'll contract out if I need to. The reason I'm asking this is because of the con side of responsibilities. When you have employees, at least I can't speak from experience, but my understanding is, your responsibility is going to drastically increase that much more, because you're going to feel you're going to have to be providing enough income for these people to live on to be able to continue to want to be your employee. So I just personally don't want that stress. And I'm just curious, yes, scares you to death to have employees. Yes, there's so much responsibility with it. And so, I would say, in the beginning, the big dreaming days, it was like, oh, of course I want to have a big company and everything. The more I realized, I'm like, no. So yeah, and so some people might be built for it and have great resources in place, and that gung-ho umph to do a great job with it. So that's one other thing me personally, and I know me and Jen briefly touched on. So it looks like people are having a few different ideas there in the comments. So all right. We are going to move on and talk about getting started. So in regards to getting started, let's go ahead and talk. We're not going to go into too much detail on these items, but this is kind of like a checklist all over the place, because it's a lot of stuff all over the place you have to consider. So I'm going to start on the left-hand side and go through, and Jen's going to talk about the items on the right-hand side, but you have to consider the business structure that you want. Lots of research goes into this potentially. Some people are just going to say, okay, I want an LLC and I don't care why, that's what I'm going to do. Some people are going to get with an attorney or an accountant and a CPA and try to figure it out. Some people are going to learn on their own. We'll go to a slide here in a little bit. We're going to see what Jen and I both are. We're both very different. So you can see that side by side. You're most likely going to want to get an EIN number. Jen can touch on the TIN number because I'm not too familiar with that, but an EIN number is basically like a social security number for your organization, so that instead of tracking your social with on legal documentation, everything, the IRS can see what's being earned within that corporation. And please, if I'm missing details, anybody feel free to add something into the chat box so everybody else listening can see. Website or web hosting. So when it comes to that, you're going to want to see, okay, and we have this somewhere else, I think, potentially. No, it's in the website. You're going to need to see what's your domain name. Do you want, I chose Instructional Design Studio. That's a long domain name. No, looking back now, I'm like, I probably could have chose something different. But so your domain name, you're going to need to purchase the domain name. You'll need to look at, how are you going to do your web hosting? You can easily get packages where it's all put together. You can kind of get different pieces and learn a lot more of the IT side on your own. It can be a small expense or a big expense. Some people stress on their website thinking it has to be. I remember one of the things when I first got started, I thought I could go out and try to get business until my website was spectacular, because I thought that's how I was going to get my business. I was at a conference and somebody was like, you're not going to get business from your website. You just need something. And I was so offended, but he was so right. I actually got my first lead from my website a few weeks ago, and my website's been up for 4 or 5 years now. So anyways, that was interesting, something to think about. So you need to consider that kind of stuff. Logo. I actually hired somebody on Fiverr.com. We were mentioning somebody in the comments a little bit ago. Fiverr is a place where freelancers go. They kind of go to start to build their portfolio a lot of times and charge a lot less for different projects. So it was a graphic designer that specialized in logo creation. I paid $5. I paid an extra, I think, 15 for like the black and white and the actual PSD, like the actual files, so I can edit them myself. So my logo cost me $20. Business name, you need to search for, is your business name available and what's it going to be, and make sure it's available in the state you're in or the states you're going to register in. Business plan, I'll let Jen talk a little bit about that because I personally didn't do a whole lot on that side of things. And you might need to be you should advise all of these decisions with an attorney or a CPA. And Jen, I'll let you continue.
Yes. And there's some great comments coming into the chat.
Oh, perfect.
You know, these kinds of presentations for me are very fun to do because of the give and take in the chat and all the fun stuff that gets brought up. So when it comes, I'm going to backtrack to one thing that Kari mentioned, which is the IRS, the EIN number, the TIN number. Those are employer ID number or taxpayer ID number, and they tie directly to your social security number, because as an independent, you are going to be asked to fill out a lot of W-9s or 1099 or provide information for 1099. And when you do that, your social security number is on there, and you do not want that all over the place. There was one year I had, I think, 15 or 16 different 1099 forms, which meant that was 16 people running around with my social security number. And you don't want to do that. So you're using that EIN, TIN as a mask. Because it ties to your social security number, the IRS gets that TIN, matches it to your social security number, and then understands that everything is all connected. So it's a way of protecting your identity. And Carolyn's making some excellent points. I mean, she's like co-running this in the chat. So picking this back up on the right-hand side, when it comes to bookkeeping, simple stuff, I have no problem doing that. But I also have a tax preparer who monitors everything over my shoulder. Fun fact about Jen Buckley is that I am dyslexic with numbers, which means that I can see a number and write it down completely wrong. Well, I'll have all the right digits. They just won't be in the right order. So it's very interesting with me with banking stuff. But I know that about myself, which is why I went out and hired her. Letterhead, do you need it? At a minimum, you need a business card, and those you can print off at home, or you can, for I think the latest special I saw was $9.99 for 500 cards at Staples. Okay, that's easy. Financial planning, always tell people to talk to a financial planner. When you're talking, when you bring up the word tax, TAX, you should either be talking to an attorney or a CPA or a financial planner. And you will find people who are two of the three, and that's fine. But you always want to make sure that you understand the risks of what you're getting yourself into and the financial implications, because nobody wants to lose their home or their car over bad financial planning, right? Banking, same thing there. With a business account, and as somebody rightly pointed out, for some things, for business loans, you have to have an actual business bank account that is separate from your personal, and that is a requirement for a lot of companies. They don't want to do an automatic draft to your bank account if it's a personal account. They want to see the business name on there. So that's part of your bona fides, right? That's your credentials as a business person. Insurance, I could literally spend an entire day on insurance, but I won't. So I'm going to leave you with this. There are a lot of different types of insurance, and I'm not talking the health insurance or vision or dental or any of that. I'm talking about general business liability insurance. And there are a lot of subsets of that. There's also errors and omissions, which is another big one that people tend to get. And if you work in the healthcare industry in the state of Florida, even if you never set foot on your client's site, you will be required to have, and I love this one, you must have, oh my God, just flew right out of my head. Workers' compensation, there you go, which is difficult to get, but you can find it. There is a website that's in our last slide with all the links to everything, called Tech Insurance, and they have some incredibly great documentation on all the different kinds of insurance and what to consider and so forth. I'm not necessarily saying you have to buy through them. Not by no means am I saying that, but they have a lot of really good FAQs on insurance questions. And business cards, to me, that's part of letterhead. And then always, always, always talk to a CPA. You're going to hear us say that a couple times tonight. I'm not a CPA. There's a reason why I'm not a CPA. So, I don't pretend to be one either. So, got a lot of good stuff in here. Yep. A lot of different ideas about which way to go. I love it.
Awesome. And we're ready to move on then? Oh, is that correct, Jen?
Go for it.
Okay. I wasn't sure. I was doing some chats there for a second with people. So
And I forgot that I wasn't driving the presentation. So,
I know that's why I was like, I think it's okay. So go ahead.
so big disclaimer here, which path is right for you. What I like about this graphic, and this is the reason why I have it in here, is it kind of gives you a really good roadmap, right? So what are the considerations for the different types of company structures? There's a sole proprietor where you just say, I'm doing business as my name, pay me, Jen Buckley, off we go. There's the LLC route, which both Kari and I took, probably for different reasons. And we actually aren't even in the same category of LLC anymore, which is interesting. But it gives you a certain amount of advantage in terms of it offers some risk protection. There's a little bit of paperwork, but very minimal, all things being equal. And the nice thing about the taxes is it's fairly straightforward. Then you get into the S Corp, and the S Corp is taxed a little bit differently simply because they have to handle payroll, even if you're the only employee. So there's more paperwork. There's more the tax side that you have to do in terms of paperwork. But the risk is it offers some legal protection, about the same as an LLC, in case something catastrophic happens. The C Corp is going to offer you a lot more legal protection, but it's a lot more paperwork. It is a lot more expensive to set up, and it is considered an individual by the IRS, so you pay more in taxes. So this is the short crib sheet version of all the different company structures. And if you're thinking about, gee, what do I have to do first to get myself set up? The first order of business is to figure out what's your business structure going to be. The second one is to apply for either an employee ID number or a taxpayer ID number, followed by, and I recommend this for everybody, is to get a license with the county that you live in, because that establishes you as a business in the eyes of your state and county. And then business insurance. So that's the simple order to make it simple.
And then the whole checking account and all that fun stuff. Oh,
yeah. Well, you need everything else in order to get the checking account. So
yeah. Yeah. So I just want to also remind us that we have 20 minutes. We're going to do our best to stay on target here and get through everything. So with that being said, with this next slide, I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but just kind of to reiterate the fact that me and Jen both have LLCs, as you'll see in front of you, but we're structured very differently. In regards to taxes, I'll say. So I don't know tons about Jen and her situation, and she doesn't know tons about my situation, but just examples in regards to, okay, so many different decisions that go into this. So we're both LLCs. She started in 2010, I was in 2016. She filed in Florida, I filed in Delaware. Long story, from some internet researching, people said, you get better legal protection, and that's what all the big companies do. So I thought I needed to do it, and really it probably didn't matter, but whatever, I did. So tax structure. Jen is taxed as a single member LLC, pass-through entity, which is what I was initially. But something that I found very interesting, and if you're currently an LLC and you didn't know this, or if you're looking to start your own company and you're not sure of what I'm saying right now, you really need to get with somebody who knows about this. Like, I wouldn't be the person to tell you, but I will tell you, you must check this out, because if you make a decent amount of money, it could potentially save you a whole lot of money in taxes. To be a LLC, but yet select to be taxed as an S Corp with the IRS. And there was a year that it really, really helped me out a whole lot. So that's something I would highly recommend you look into. When you look at the fees, obviously there's different fees to get started. The annual fee to renew to keep your business name and your license in that state. I pay for a registered agent in Delaware because I'm not physically there. You have to have a registered agent in Florida. Jen knows a bit more about it, but I think it's included, or you can be your own registered agent, meaning some place that's open 8 to 5, Monday through Friday, that take mail legally and sign for things. And then in regards to taxes, Jen would be paying quarterly tax payments to help, since she doesn't have an employer taking money out of her paycheck to pay the government, the IRS, for the money she's earning. She has to be responsible for doing that on a quarterly basis, and then file the taxes at the end of the year. And that Schedule C is what helps her determine her business income, which flows through to her 1040, which we all potentially fill out. On my side of things, whenever I take payroll, I'm an employee. Being the way I'm structured, I'm an employee of my organization. So I will take payroll from my organization. And when I do, I have to pay payroll taxes like an employer would for employees. And I have to send money to off to the different federal taxes and everything by the 15th of each month. And then at the end of the year, I have to complete a 1020S, which is what I need to do for my S Corp, showing how much my S Corp has earned or lost. And then it will generate what's called a K1. So she's doing the Schedule C, I'm K1. And then that's what flows into my 1040 to tell me how much I have earned. So again, not that you need to know all this stuff right now, but just so you know that there's differences and there's contrast. So it's kind of hard to say that this is how it always is. There are different situations. So if anybody else has anything to add, feel free to do so in the comments as well. And due to time, I will move on. Jen.
Okay, I promised I would make this simple with the taxes. You'll notice the big disclaimer in the upper corner. There's a reason for that. Still not a CPA, nor am I a tax attorney, nor do I play one on TV. The bottom line with taxes that you have to know actually isn't really on this slide. But when you're an employee of a company or you're working as a W-2 through a recruiter, they pay your taxes, they pay the employer side of the taxes for you, and they withhold taxes for you to make sure that you're covered, right? So if you all remember, every year you have to go through and you figure out what your withholding is going to be. That's what they're helping you to do, is to make sure that you have the money set aside for those taxes. As soon as you go out on your own, however, you get 100% of it. You get to pay all of it. And that goes for FICA, which is the Federal Insurance Contributions Act. That's your Medicare, Social Security, disability, some unemployment, and some other local government programs that are in there as well. The thing about the IRS is, and this should shock absolutely nobody, is that they're not really content to wait until the end of the year to get their cut. They kind of want it as you earn it. Or as they view it, they want it as soon as you earn it for them, right? But they're nice enough to let us pay that in quarterly installments versus every month if you are an S Corp. So that's kind of how that works. So since it is your responsibility, that means that it's up to you, and this is where you get to put on that hat of being, you know, your other hat in the company. You get to make those payments yourself. Both Kari and I have a recommendation on this, and we're going to talk about this in the next slide anyway, but we recommend saving approximately 30%, give or take, out of every paycheck that you get. And you put that aside, and you put that in, I actually put mine into a savings account, and that's what I use to pay my taxes out of. And then there's other things. So there are other expenses that you need to kind of account for as well that will come out of that same account. Kari has a note that she signed up with Eftps, which is, I can't even remember what it stands for, but that's a neat little online doohickey that the IRS has set up that works great, by the way. You log in, you set up your payment, you link it to your bank account, and you can literally set it and forget it. And the beautiful thing about that is you can set that up. So if you're going to be on vacation when the next tax payment is due, you set it up before you go on vacation. You don't have to do paper with that. So that's kind of what this is all about, is making sure that you do not forget to pay your taxes, because I will tell you right now, over the years, I've heard more than my fair share of horror stories of people who set themselves up in business, got everything great, made a ton of money, completely forgot about Uncle Sam and the IRS until the next year when they got audited. And that is not a pleasant process. So moving right along, we decided to include a nice simple slide with a rule of thumb. And I can't flip the slide, Kari. Still not driving. And this is a very quick and easy rule of thumb to live by, which is whatever your rate is, whether it's 25 an hour, 60 an hour, 300 an hour, it doesn't matter. You're going to want to put 30% aside in a separate account for you. And the breakdown on this is Yes, you don't get to play with all that money right up front. However, you're not just saving for a rainy day. You're saving for your taxes. You're saving to pay office supplies and internet and your phone bill and all the other business expenses that you don't think of as being a business expense because you're so used to it already being included by your employer, right? And I'll be honest, my first couple of years in business, I actually saved 35%. And what that meant was at the end of the year, after I paid all my taxes and everything else, I had a lovely vacation fund. That was awesome. And some of that goes to your retirement accounts and everything else. But it was really kind of nice to know that I was always covered with every paycheck. Right. So talking about the money, Kari and I'm sharing this for a reason. So Kari and I argued about this slide a lot, a lot. And she's sitting there laughing because we did argue. We went back and forth on this quite a bit. And the reason, what we were trying to show, or what I was specifically trying to show and not explaining particularly well, is that as an employee with a company, right, you may be earning $50,000 a year. And I picked super round numbers. And yeah, there's some pennies in here, but I rounded to make it simple, right? Well, that's about $24 an hour. Let's say that as an independent contractor, you're making that same amount, right? What does that really look like though at the end of the year, right? Because your employee share of FICA is 7.6%, but as an independent contractor, you're paying all of it. That's 15.3%. And then you have to factor in your business insurance, right? Well, an employee doesn't have to worry about that. That's what their company pays for. They don't have to worry about overhead or expenses or PTO or sick time because all of that is baked into their benefits package. Well, guess what? You're independent. You don't get that. So at the end of the day, when everything's factored in, that 50,000 a year that would have been a net pay of 44.9 is now 32.3, and you're like, wait a minute, hang on, where'd the money go? So this is why one of the things I always kind of try to tell people is, yes, you could bill yourself out at the same as what you were making before, but really that doesn't cover everything, right? So when you take a look at all these, and I don't know if you guys get the updates from various headhunting websites where they send you that, hey, we got this great position, and it's like, I don't know, 80 an hour or 60 an hour or whatever an hour. You're like, that looks awesome. I'd love to do that. Well, if you're independent, yes, you are making that amount per hour, but you don't necessarily get to keep on. Right? So these are all things to kind of factor in. And you'll notice we have this lovely disclaimer off on the side that these are estimates. These numbers will be very different if you have, if you're married, if you're single, if you have dependents, if your spouse or significant other has their own business. So you have a lot of things that are impacting these numbers, including the fact that I did not put in here health insurance or retirement funding or state, local, and sales taxes. So I have a colleague who works for herself. She's in New York. She pays local, county, state, and federal. That's a lot of taxes. So you have to, factor all these things in. And since I know we have people on the call who are not all in Florida, there are other places where states do take their chunk. Okay, so moving right along. Pay rates. What do you charge? Well, I alluded to this earlier, so here I'm going to talk about it. If you are someone working on a W-2 through a recruiter, you probably will see a lower rate per hour. However, your employer is covering your taxes. And sometimes if you work with the same recruiter long enough, they do offer benefits like some paid time off, some health insurance, etc. So that's all kind of factored into that. If you're working as a 1099, which is an independent contractor slash corp to corp, you'll hear that phrase from time to time, you do get a higher hourly rate, but you're responsible for all of those taxes and you don't get any benefits either. Not the traditional benefits. I consider the benefit of working for myself a benefit in and of itself. So you have that too. So should we move on? And Kari,
Yeah. Yes, it is. Okay. So going to try to be mindful here. We got 7 minutes left, so I will probably rush through these to get to the end and then see if we have questions, and we can continue on. And oh, the resources, Jen, would you be able to get the link to the resources ready? It's in the document,
Yes.
the text doc. Okay, so finding work. Obviously there's tons of places you can find work, and everybody who's on the call, please feel free to put in, your suggestions with specifics as we go through this of where you find your work. So specialized websites, government run procurement sites. So like, oh gosh, military.gov, usajobs.gov, networking. So being professional associations and groups. So being involved in groups like ATD, e-learning guild. I mean, there's Slack groups that I'm a part of. There's Facebook groups I'm a part of. We're going to get to social media here in a second, but I'm going to bring this up just because your network and how you expand your network and the ways that you look to just add value within the community is going to pay itself back. If you kind of just sit off on your own and do your own thing and don't look out to get much work, in my opinion, in my experience, it will be harder to find work, and at least good paying work from my experience. So the more you're out and involved is more beneficial. What I was going to say is I was on a Twitter chat when I was on it, like it's a weekly chat. It happens the same time, like every Thursday, LRN chat. It was by the e-learning guild, I think. And after attending it several weeks in a row, I had somebody reach out to me from Ohio and say, hey, I've seen you active on there. If you happen to do you happen to have any availability to help us with some contract work when we have extra needs? I'm like, yeah. So specialized websites, I mean, I personally prefer to get like through word of mouth and networks that I know, because a lot of times when you find it on specialized websites, in my opinion, from what I've seen, you're not going to get paid as much. There's different organizations that are, let's see, why can't I think, recruiting type websites. I know like Training Pros, they're amazing. They have tons of great opportunities for trainers and for instructional design and all kinds of things within our industry that they have listed that you can register with them. So hopefully people are putting some items in here, and I'm seeing the time. So I'm going to move to the next slide here. We can talk and help more with that later if you'd like, but it goes just to networking. I love networking and getting out and meeting people and being curious. I think being curious to learn about other people, what they do, how they do what they do, and just having a genuine interest in them and trying to learn more has been super beneficial for me to be able to learn more about people, what opportunities there are, get to know them, form relationships. And social media has been a great way for me to do that. So again, due to time, let's see. Time-wise, I think we're going to skip these surveys. Plus, we have people commenting here in the comment box. So we were going to see, what you have done or what has caught your attention on social media. So through these chats going on here in the next minute or two, if you have something that comes to mind and is like, this has caught my attention on social media, I think I want to try this, or I think people should do this, or this helped me find work one time. Please feel free to leave some comments in there on that. And then we are on, let's see, billing, Jen.
Yes. So I wanted to talk, this is a question that I get all the time. And it's one of those things that I never really sat down and came up with like a single comprehensive answer. But since this comes up all the time, I figure it's probably a good time to do that. And that is, should you bill by project or an hourly rate? And what I will tell you, and this is something that I've been seeing a whole lot longer than just the 11 years I've been off on my own doing my own thing. And that's going to depend on a lot of factors. Trust is the most important factor here. One thing I've learned is that when you charge by the hour and you submit invoices either weekly or bi-monthly, it makes it a lot less likely that you're going to end up with a client who does not pay the bill, because they're being reminded that you're still working, you're doing work for them, you're doing work for them, you're doing work for them. Oh, and here's the final product, and here's my final bill. So do you bill by project or do you bill by hour? I happen to prefer the by hour. I've heard of way too many horror stories where the client was caught unaware as to how many hours that the final project was going to be worth. And honestly, I have a few things to say on that. Number one, did you have a contract? And number two, did you have a well-defined statement or scope of work? Because without either of those, if you try to invoice lump sum for a project, you're going to get pushback. And what I've discovered is of all those horror stories, when I've asked that question, A, did you have a contract? And B, did you have a well-defined scope of work? The answer was always no. That's how you're going to get burned. I'm sorry to say, but that is what's going to happen. I have done a few projects where we've done it in phases and I billed by phase, but that was a client that was already established with me as a client. We knew each other really well. It was one of those things where we had the contract, we had the statement of work, it was all divided out by phases, and it worked out great. So essentially, you get out of it what you put into it. The more upfront work that you put into it, the more likely you're going to have a fairly smooth experience. There are always exceptions to that, of course, but it's less likely that you're going to have a problem. So that's my story on that. And this is our tools and resources. These buttons are all links out to everything we mentioned tonight. A lot of stuff.
And we will send this out to you guys. That I don't know if you saw, but Jen put a link in the chat. If you guys have your own resources that you'd like to add, we were going to try to collect and curate any resources you have. So we'll take these resources, anything you have. So if you can go to that document, and it should be open and collaborative where anybody can be adding stuff in during or after. I don't see anything that's, see a lot of people. Yeah, I see a lot of people in here right now. So feel free to go ahead and add your information in there, and we will build that out and get that out to everybody. And next is, wanted to go ahead and make sure you guys all know of upcoming events. I am right now going to post the links to and the information at just one big message here if you're interested. There is a fresh research on L&D employment and pay coming up. Now, if you're interested in the latest research on pay in the field, that's a great session to attend. That is the one on the far left. If you're interested in getting your CPT or APD certification, there's a free information session coming up. I think the whole study group session is free for members. I think it's $50 for non-members or non-chapter members, if I remember correctly. And then Sean, who's on this call, he's hosting the next virtual happy hour coming up February 25th. Sean just turned his camera on. Hello, Sean. So if anybody's interested in any of those, feel free to check us out on the website and join those. The one last thing that I'm going to come up with here is, we would love, if you are open to it, to take a few minutes. We would love to get your reflection on what we covered today. So if you would feel so inclined, once I find my chat, I'm going to put that in the chat and ask for you to please open that and leave us your reflections of anything you have from our event. We are 1 minute over. Thank you so much for your time. I'm personally willing and able to stay around and talk, answer questions that I hoped we had more time. Luckily, we were ending right about on time. But if you would like to stay and ask questions, please feel free to do so. We'll go ahead and put our contact information in as well. Thank you so much, Jen. I don't know if you want to jump in real quick while I do that, and feel free to stick around, but thank you.
So I'm going to hang out as well. We will turn off the recording, and I will be saving the chat, and we'll include that with the PowerPoint as well, because there's so much good stuff in here.
Thank you, everybody.